The palace city of Eldrath was alive with whispers. Stone towers reached for the sky like frozen fingers, and the streets below twisted like serpents in shadow. Lamps flickered along narrow alleys, casting long, trembling shapes. Among the grandeur, tension hung thick in the air, almost tangible, as if the city itself knew that change and danger was near. Lyra, her soft golden hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck, moved cautiously along the grand corridor of the palace. Her hand rested protectively on her swelling belly. Though her steps were careful, her heart raced with anticipation and fear. She was pregnant, the child of Kael, the Alpha King, a secret only a handful knew. The very walls seemed to whisper warnings. Jealous eyes watched. Conspiracies lingered in the shadows, and old curses ancient, as the stones themselves were never truly gone. Her breaths came shallow and quick, echoing against the marble floor. She paused near a tapestry depicting the first Alpha Kings, their eyes sewn with gold thread. Lyra's fingers brushed the edge, her mind wandering to the life growing inside her. She had promised herself she would protect this child no matter what. And yet, in Eldrath, protection was never simple. Above her, on the balcony of the upper gallery, Kael stood motionless. The sunlight fell across his broad shoulders, highlighting the sharp lines of his face, the cold, controlled strength that made him feared by many. Yet now, his gaze softened as it fell on Lyra. She did not see him. He had chosen to remain hidden, watching, waiting. Every step she took, every small pause, he noted, not as a ruler watching his subject, but as her mate, the one bound to her by ancient, unbreakable laws of the Alpha Bond. He felt a swelling of pride, but beneath it, a storm of fear. This palace, for all its beauty, was filled with envy and malice, and those who resented Lyra's position would not rest until they struck. The corridor was quiet except for her soft footsteps. And then, just as she rounded a corner, she felt it. The cold gaze of the nobles who had long envied her closeness to the king. Their whispers ceased abruptly as she passed, replaced by the soft rustle of silk and the metallic click of rings on stone. Lyra's senses sharpened. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, a gesture of both protection and comfort. "I must be careful," she whispered under her breath. "I cannot let them see fear." And yet, fear was not all that stirred within her. She felt a pulse of anger as well, a heat that ran from her heart to her fingertips. She had survived danger before, but now, with her child growing inside her, every misstep could be fatal. She tightened her grip on the folds of her gown and continued. It happened so fast, she barely had time to react. From the shadows, two nobles emerged. Their faces, masks of polite concern, but their hands were ready to strike. They pretended to stumble into her, but it was no accident. One hand on her arm, a shove against her side, and Lyra found herself falling backward. Time seemed to stretch. Her heart leapt into her throat. She tried to grab the railing, tried to steady herself, but the polished marble was slick beneath her fingers. The world tilted, and then she was tumbling, her cry echoing through the hall, bouncing off the grand arches and into the shadows. And then, a presence filled the corridor. A silence that pressed against the walls, like a living thing. Kael had moved. He was no longer on the balcony. He descended with the grace and speed of a predator. Every step measured, controlled, yet thrumming with raw power. His eyes burned as he landed just before her fall, the ground trembling under his weight. The nobles froze, their polite facades slipping. They had thought they were clever. But Kael's presence was more than mere authority. It was a storm contained in human form. The air seemed to thrum with power, the very stones of the palace shivering. Kael extended a hand, catching Lyra just before she hit the floor. Her body pressed against him, trembling, and he could feel her fear as sharply as if it were his own. The nobles gasped, realizing too late that the king had been watching all along. "Get away from her," Kale's voice was low, almost a growl, but controlled. The air seemed to bend around his words. Do not dare touch her again. The nobles stepped back, terror flashing in their eyes. Kale's gaze cut through them, unyielding. They had always known he was powerful, but now they saw the depth of his wrath, the absolute force that could be unleashed if his mate or heir were harmed. Lyra's breath came in shallow gasps, but there was also awe in her eyes. Even after all she had faced, even knowing Kale's strength, seeing him now, his fury contained but radiating like a storm, she realized the true depth of the bond between them. Kale, she whispered, voice trembling. It's… Shh, he interrupted gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You are safe now. For now. His eyes softened, but the undercurrent of power remained. A reminder that his mercy was a choice, not a given. Lyra nodded, still holding on to him, feeling the strength of his presence like a shield around her. And yet, even in the safety of his arms, the palace seemed darker, colder. The nobles had retreated, but she could sense their hatred lingering, coiling in corners and crevices. She knew this was far from over. Kale helped her to the nearest chamber, each step echoing like a drumbeat of warning to anyone who might follow. He guided her to a high-backed chair, motioning for her to sit. His eyes never left her, and even as he closed the door behind them, the air seemed to hum with unspoken threats. You must rest, Kale said softly. Do not move until I return. His hands lingered on hers. Warm, protective. Lyra nodded, letting herself sink into the chair, feeling both vulnerable and cherished. As Kale left the room, Lyra's mind drifted to the history of this palace. How many Omegas had walked these halls, only to vanish in the night? How many secrets were buried beneath the stones? And how many curses remained, waiting to be awakened? She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the faint movement of her unborn child. The life within her was fragile, yet radiant with promise. And that promise was worth everything, even the fury of the king, even the wrath of the jealous nobles. Beyond the chamber door, Kale's mind was already working. He would not allow this transgression to go unpunished. He would protect Lyra and their child with every ounce of power he possessed, even if it meant calling upon the ancient laws and forces that bound their bloodline. The nobles who had dared to harm her would learn that crossing the king's mate was a mistake that could not be undone. The palace was silent now, but the silence was deceptive. Shadows moved where they should not, and whispers crept along walls that had stood for centuries. Kale could feel it, the stirrings of something older than the palace itself. Something that had waited for the moment when a child of prophecy would come into the world. Lyra rested her head against the back of the chair, closing her eyes, trying to calm the storm inside her. But even in this moment of respite, a chill ran down her spine. She could feel eyes watching from the shadows, not just of the living, but of those bound by curses long forgotten. Her hand drifted to the window, staring out over the city below. The streets were quiet, but she could sense the tension, the plotting that waited for the right moment to strike again. And in that quiet, she whispered a promise. I will not let them harm you, or me, or our child. Far above, Kale stood once more on the balcony, looking out over Eldrath. The wind tugged at his cloak, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of storms. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the city. He knew this was only the beginning. The nobles who had pushed Lyra were pawns in a much larger game, a game that had been played for centuries, involving blood, power, and the shadows of curses long dead but never gone. And as the first raindrops began to fall, dark and silver against the palace stones, Kale's jaw tightened. He whispered under his breath, not just as a king, but as a mate. They do not know what they have awakened, and they will learn soon enough. The wind carried his words down the empty corridors, through the shadows, and into the ears of those who thought themselves clever. And somewhere, deep within the stones of Eldrath, a presence stirred, sensing the child, sensing the bond, sensing the danger yet to come. Lyra, safe for the moment, did not yet know how close she had come to the edge. Kale, fierce and protective, did not yet know how deeply the curse would reach into their lives. And the city of Eldrath, old and watchful, waited, holding its breath for the storm that had just begun. And in that silence, a single thought echoed in the palace halls. The game had only begun. The palace was silent, except for the faint hum of candlelight and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Lyra rested in Kael's private chambers, a room rarely visited by anyone but the king himself. Heavy curtains blocked the sunlight, allowing only thin streams of gold to fall across the floor. The walls were lined with ancient tomes, magical wards, and portraits of kings long gone, their eyes seeming to follow her every movement. Kael did not leave her side. He knelt in front of her, examining her carefully, his strong hands gentle yet firm. His touch reassured her, but the storm behind his eyes betrayed the fury simmering beneath. "You must rest," Kael said, his voice low but controlled. "Every step you take now is for your safety and the child's. No one will harm you while I breathe." Lyra shook her head, despite the ache in her limbs. "Kael, they pushed me. I survived. Yes, but there is danger everywhere. I cannot hide forever." Her voice trembled, though her tone held a quiet strength. "I will not be a prisoner in my own home." Kael's gaze softened, and for a moment, the king disappeared, leaving only the mate who adored her. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You are not a prisoner. You are protected. But this palace is filled with men who would see you fall for nothing more than envy and greed. We must be careful. Strategy is sometimes more powerful than strength." Lyra nodded, resting her hands on her belly. The child moved slightly, a gentle kick that made her smile. Kael followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing at the small life within her, a life that bound them, that made them stronger together, yet also made them vulnerable. "We must strike carefully," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "The nobles who dared this, they think they are clever. But cleverness cannot match the wrath of an alpha king." The room seemed to darken, as though the shadows themselves leaned closer to hear him. Kael's mind raced, planning how to protect Lyra, while ensuring that those who harmed her would face justice. He did not crave mindless vengeance. He craved balance, a correction to the insult that could not go unanswered. Meanwhile, Lyra thought of the past, how she had met Kael in the secret gardens of the palace, hidden from prying eyes, how their love had grown in stolen moments, whispers under moonlight, shared glances that spoke of trust and understanding. She remembered the first time he had held her hand, strong yet careful, aware of the fragile boundaries of a court filled with envy and suspicion. "Kael," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you ever fear for our child? For me?" Kael's jaw tightened. "Every day, every moment. But fear is not weakness, it is awareness. Awareness allows me to act before they strike." He paused, resting his forehead against hers. "And I will act. I will protect you, no matter what it takes." Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his promise. But even in the safety of his arms, unease lingered. She knew the nobles would not forgive their humiliation. They had underestimated Kael once, and they would not make the same mistake again. Days passed, and the palace became a chessboard. Kael moved with precision, using his authority to isolate the conspirators. He discovered secret correspondences, hidden alliances, and ancient magic left behind by previous kings. Each piece he uncovered brought him closer to a plan of subtle but absolute retribution. Lyra watched, amazed and unsettled by the depth of his strategy. Kael did not simply rely on brute force. He used knowledge, influence, and the shadows themselves as instruments of power. The nobles who had harmed her were left to wonder if their misfortunes were chance or a carefully woven punishment. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and violet, a servant whispered a troubling rumor. A rival noble had vanished from his quarters, leaving only a note burned at the edges, smelling faintly of sulfur. Lyra read the words carefully, her heart tightening. "You cannot hide from the past, or from the curse." Kael's expression darkened. He took the note from her hands, and crushed it, a small spark of residual magic hissing against the floor. "The curse is stirring," he muttered. "And it knows the child is coming." Lyra's eyes widened. She had heard tales of the royal curse, a shadow that haunted the bloodline, striking Omegas and their children with misfortune and loss. It was said to awaken only when the royal line was in danger, its wrath ancient and relentless. "Kale, what does it mean?" she asked, a tremor in her voice. "It means we must prepare," he said. "Not only against men, but against forces older than this palace. Older than any living memory. Forces that will not yield without challenge." That night, Kale taught Lyra how to sense the subtle threads of magic that moved unseen through the palace. He guided her hands over wards, etched into the walls, teaching her to feel their hum. "The bond between us," he explained, "is not just love, it is power. It can protect, it can guide, it can even break curses, but only if we trust each other completely." Lyra's heart swelled with a mixture of fear and awe. She had known love before, but this was more than affection or devotion. It was a force that could shape destiny. As she practiced, feeling the pulse of her child's life mingling with her own, a sense of connection deepened between them. Their bond was no longer secret. It was a living thing, powerful enough to challenge even the shadows that stirred in Eldrath. But the nobles, clever and desperate, were not idle. In the dead of night, whispers of a plot reached Kale's ears. They planned to bind Lyra with enchanted chains during the upcoming council ceremony, a ceremonial gathering where the nobles would kneel before the king and voice loyalty. Their intention was clear: humiliate her publicly and weaken Kale's claim to the throne. Kale's jaw clenched. The idea of such treachery ignited a controlled fury within him. Yet he did not rush blindly. He would show them the consequences of their actions, but on his terms, in a way that demonstrated not only power, but justice. The day of the ceremony arrived. Sunlight streamed through tall stained glass windows, casting fractured rainbows onto the polished floors. The nobles filed into the hall, dressed in silks and jewels, faces bright masks hiding envy and fear. Lyra followed Kale, her posture regal despite the trembling of her heart. As the nobles prepared to execute their scheme, a subtle signal passed between Kale and the palace wards. Shadows shifted imperceptibly, magical threads of light twisting to reveal hidden intentions. The nobles gasped as the enchanted chains they had prepared slipped from their hands, harmlessly clattering to the floor, their faces blanching in confusion and fear. Kale stepped forward, his presence filling the hall. "Do not mistake my patience for weakness," he said, voice carrying across the chamber. "The hand that harms my mate or my heir will meet justice, and justice in Eldrath is not lenient." A hush fell. The nobles realized their plotting had been anticipated. Some bowed quickly, attempting to hide their fear. Others paled and exchanged frantic glances. Lyra, standing beside Kale, felt the weight of the moment. She had survived the push down the stairs, but now she understood fully what it meant to be bound to an Alpha King. Protection came not from walls or guards, but from the power of the bond between them, a bond that could command respect, fear, and even the forces of the unseen world. Yet, even in this moment of triumph, unease lingered. A noble who had escaped the hall whispered in a corner of the city, calling upon an old prophecy: "The child will decide the fate of kings and curses alike." Lyra felt a strange warmth, a subtle glow emanating from her belly. The child moved as if responding to the words, a tiny but potent reminder that destiny had begun to stir. Kale's eyes narrowed, sensing not only the power of the child but also the dangers that still lurked beyond the palace walls. The hall emptied, the nobles retreating in fear and confusion. Kale held Lyra close, pressing a protective kiss to her forehead. "This is only the beginning," he said. "There are forces we have not yet seen. The curse, the prophecy, they are awakening. We must be ready." Lyra nodded, feeling the weight of her own courage rising to meet the challenges ahead. She had survived once, and she would survive again. But now, with Kale at her side and the child within her, She understood that survival alone was not enough. They would need to fight, to protect, and to embrace the power that their bond offered against men, magic, and fate itself. Outside, the city of Eldrath shimmered in the early evening light. Shadows lengthened, stretching across stone streets and quiet alleys. Somewhere, deep in the twisting corridors and forgotten chambers of the palace, something ancient stirred, sensing the child, sensing the bond, sensing the challenges yet to come. And as the wind carried the faint whisper of prophecy through the city, Lyra and Kale stood together, ready to face the flames that would come. The game had only begun, but already, the first moves of destiny were falling into place, and nothing would ever be the same again. The palace of Eldrath seemed alive in a way it never had before. Shadows curled along the walls like serpents, twisting and stretching as though they had their own minds. Candlelight flickered, and the air was thick with a strange hum, a resonance that stirred something deep within the stones. Lyra could feel it even before she stepped into the hallway. It was as if the palace itself knew that change was coming, and the shadows whispered warnings that only those with keen senses could hear. Kael had sensed it too. The events of the past days, the push down the stairs, the conspiracies of the nobles, the stirrings of prophecy, all pointed to a force older and darker than either of them had imagined. He had spent the night walking the palace corridors, hands brushing over wards etched centuries ago, feeling for any disturbance, any tremor that might signal danger. The bond with Lyra, now stronger than ever, allowed him to sense not just her fear, but the subtle heartbeat of their child. Resonating in the quiet chambers, Lyra followed Kael to the highest tower, where sunlight streamed through stained glass, casting colored light on the ancient stones. The tower had been kept secret for generations, a place where the royal family's mystical knowledge had been preserved. Here, Kael could teach her not only to sense the unseen threads of magic in Eldrath, but also to awaken the latent power within her. You feel it, don't you? Kael's voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. The presence that lingers, watching, the curse that sleeps, but is waking. Lyra nodded, placing a hand on her belly. I feel something. A cold shadow, moving closer. I don't know if it is danger or a warning. Kael knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. It is both. The curse has always been tied to the royal bloodline, and now it senses the child. It tests us, seeing if we are strong enough to survive. Lyra swallowed hard. Can it harm the child? Kael's jaw tightened. It will try, but together, we are stronger than it. The bond between us, and the child growing inside you, is more powerful than any curse. But you must trust yourself and me. They began a ritual of sorts, simple yet profound. Kael guided Lyra's hands over the ancient wards carved into the walls, teaching her to feel the hum of energy beneath the stone. The palace remembers, he explained. Every spell cast, every curse laid, it leaves an echo. You can sense it, touch it, even alter it, if your mind is steady. Lyra concentrated, closing her eyes and taking deep, steadying breaths. The warmth of her child mingled with her own energy, sending ripples through her veins. She could feel threads of shadow and light twisting around her, whispers brushing against her consciousness. At first, they seemed chaotic, frightening. But Kael's voice guided her. Do not fear it. It is part of you, part of the child. Together, you can shape it. As she opened her eyes, the faintest glow emanated from her hands. The shadows in the tower shifted, pulling back slightly, as if acknowledging her awakening. Lyra gasped, astonished at her own power. Kael smiled, pride and relief washing over him. You are ready, he said softly, stronger than any would expect. The curse may be old, but it has not seen this strength before. But the peace was brief. Far below, the nobles who had plotted against Lyra had not forgotten their defeat. Whispers of rebellion echoed in hidden corners of the palace. They had discovered forbidden texts, spells meant to bind and weaken. And they planned to strike during the upcoming Festival of Shadows. a celebration that honored the palace's mystical history. Kale sensed their plotting before it began. The palace's shadows had shifted, carrying whispers he alone could interpret. He took Lyra's hands in his, grounding her as he explained, "They will try again. But this time, they do not know the power we now command. Trust me." Lyra nodded, but fear gnawed at the edges of her resolve. "Kale, what if it is too strong? What if the curse, or their magic, overwhelms us?" Kale cupped her face, his eyes locking with hers. "Nothing will overwhelm us if we stand together. You, me, and the child, we are one. And our bond is unbreakable." The Festival of Shadows arrived under a moonless night. Torches lined the palace grounds, casting dancing light on the assembled nobles and citizens. The air was thick with excitement and tension. Lyra, draped in a gown of deep sapphire, walked beside Kale. Their hands brushed, a subtle connection of warmth and power that seemed to ripple outward, touching those near them. The nobles, plotting silently, moved as one toward the altar where the ceremonial bindings were kept. Their plan was precise: ensnare Lyra in enchanted chains, humiliate her before the court, and weaken Kale's image as king. But as they reached for the chains, the shadows themselves came alive. The torches flickered, and the air grew colder. Threads of light, guided by Lyra's emerging power, coiled around the nobles' hands, knocking the chains from their grasp. Gasps spread across the crowd. Whispers ran like fire. The king and his mate, their bond, it is unlike anything we have seen. Kale stepped forward, his presence immense, commanding. "You will not harm her," he said, voice resonating with authority. "Not one of you, and anyone who dares will answer to the shadows themselves." The nobles froze, fear overtaking their envy. Their plotting had been seen, their plans unraveling before they could act. And yet, a small, insidious thought whispered in Kale's mind. The curse was still stirring. Their awakening was only part of the larger threat. Lyra's heart pounded as she sensed the subtle energy within her growing stronger. Her child stirred, responding to the tension, the danger. It was as if even the unborn life within her knew the challenge that was approaching. A soft glow emanated from her belly, faint but undeniable, and Kale's eyes narrowed as he recognized the sign. "The prophecy," he whispered. "It begins to move." A sudden wind swept through the festival grounds, extinguishing torches and sending banners flying. The nobles screamed, caught in the chaos. Shadows deepened, forming shapes that seemed almost alive, creeping along the walls and floors. Lyra instinctively stepped forward, her hands glowing brighter, feeling the child's energy join with hers, pushing back the darkness. Kale was at her side in an instant, wrapping an arm around her and drawing the shadows toward him. The display of their combined power was breathtaking, terrifying, and undeniable. The crowd watched in awe, realizing that the king and his mate were not only rulers but forces of nature, capable of bending the very essence of magic. Yet, in the midst of this triumph, Lyra felt something she had not expected, a faint, chilling presence watching from the edges of the palace grounds. A figure, tall and cloaked, moving with silent intent. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its aura radiated power older than the palace itself. Lyra's hands trembled slightly as she felt the child respond with unease. Kale's grip on her tightened, his senses alert. "Something approaches," he murmured, his voice tense. "And it is not one of the nobles." The figure stepped forward, revealing a face partially hidden beneath a hood. Lyra could feel the weight of its gaze. A cold, measuring force that seemed to pierce through flesh and stone. Kale's eyes narrowed, recognizing the aura of an ancient force, bound to the curse and the prophecy. "You think you are ready," the figure said, voice echoing like distant thunder. "But you have only begun. The child, the bond, it is not yet complete. The shadows have not given their final test." Lyra's breath caught. The air around them seemed to chill, and the glow from her hands dimmed slightly. Even Kale, the Alpha King, felt the ripple of challenge in his core. "What do you want?" Kale demanded, his voice sharp, carrying both authority and warning. "To see if your bond will hold," the figure replied. "To see if the prophecy will bend to your will, or break you both." A shiver ran through the festival grounds as the figure stepped back, disappearing into the shadows, leaving behind a faint, lingering whisper. "The child will decide the fate of kings and curses alike." Lyra pressed her hands to her belly, feeling the movement of life within, stronger now and aware of the danger. Kale pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "We have faced men," he said quietly. "We have faced shadows. But this is different. We must prepare for what comes next." Together, Lyra nodded, determination and fear mixing within her. She had learned that power was not only in strength, but in trust, in courage, in the bond that now connected her, Kale, and the child. And though the figure had vanished, the sense of looming challenge remained. Heavy and unyielding. The festival ended under uneasy skies. Citizens whispered of the glowing hands of the queen-to-be, of the king's unyielding power, and of the shadowy figure that had disappeared into the night. Kale and Lyra returned to the tower, aware that this was only the beginning of a test older than Eldrath itself. And as the palace settled into a restless silence, Lyra could not shake the feeling that the curse had only begun to stir, and that the prophecy would soon demand more than either she or Kale had imagined. The shadows had awoken. The game had deepened. And destiny, with all its dark and mysterious power, was waiting. The palace of Eldrath slept uneasily under a sky heavy with dark clouds. Rain had begun to fall in soft, persistent streams, making the ancient stones glisten and adding a quiet rhythm to the night. Inside the tallest tower, Kale and Lyra stood side by side, hands intertwined, preparing for the challenge they both knew was coming. The shadows that had stirred in the festival had not vanished. They had merely retreated, waiting for the moment when the child would awaken the prophecy. Lyra could feel it, a cold, pulsating energy pressing at the edges of her consciousness. She placed her hands on her belly, feeling the faint glow of life inside her. The child's presence was no longer gentle or hidden. It pulsed with awareness, as if recognizing the danger and preparing to act. Kale tightened his grip on her hands, his expression stern yet tender. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together. We will not falter. Our bond is stronger than any curse, stronger than any shadow." Lyra nodded, taking in a deep, steadying breath. Her heart beat in rhythm with the life inside her, a steady drum of courage and hope. She felt fear, yes, but it was mingled with something far more powerful: trust, love, and determination. She had survived the fall down the stairs, the jealous plots of nobles, and the first stirrings of the curse. Now, she was ready to face its full force. Outside, the storm grew, wind lashing against the tower windows, lightning illuminating the city in brief. White flashes. The palace seemed to respond, as if sensing the coming clash of power. Shadows lengthened, twisting into shapes that were almost alive, moving like dark waves across the walls. Kale raised his hand, and the wards etched into the stones around them glowed faintly. "The curse will come," he said, his voice firm. "It will test everything: your courage, your strength, your bond. And we will answer it. Together." A chill swept the room, and the shadows coalesced, forming a dark, spectral figure that towered above them. Its presence was immense, a weight pressing on the air itself. Lyra's breath caught as she saw it. A manifestation of the ancient curse, a being older than the palace, older than any living memory, and now drawn to the child within her. Kale stepped in front of Lyra, his form radiating power, protective and unyielding. "You will not touch her," he said, voice echoing like thunder. "Not now. Not ever." The figure advanced, its voice a low, rumbling whisper. "You cannot escape what is destined," it said. The prophecy must be fulfilled. One will rise, and one will fall. Lyra felt the warmth of her child respond, tiny yet potent, a force intertwining with her own energy. She closed her eyes, letting the bond she shared with Kyle flow through her, feeling the rhythm of their hearts and the pulse of the child within her. The glow in her hands brightened, casting light into the dark corners of the room. "You will not harm us," she whispered, her voice steady, though her body trembled with energy. "We are one. Together, we are stronger than your darkness." The shadow hesitated, sensing the combined power of the Alpha King, the Omega, and the unborn child. Its form wavered, shifting as if uncertain. Kale reached out, his hands glowing with the energy of the wards, and his bond with Lyra. Together, they extended their hands toward the shadow. Energy met energy, light against darkness. The palace shook with the force of the clash. Stones cracking and wards flaring, Lyra felt her strength surge as the child responded, a steady heartbeat of pure, radiant power pushing against the shadows. The curse howled, a sound that echoed through the walls and into the city itself. But Kale and Lyra did not falter. In the midst of the storm, Lyra realized something extraordinary. She could shape the energy, guide it, and bend it to protect her family. The bond with Kale was no longer just love, it was power, unbreakable and absolute. Shadows that had once threatened to overwhelm them now recoiled, twisting and retreating under the force of their unity. The spectral figures shrieked, a sound like wind tearing through ancient forests, before dissolving into nothingness. The air cleared, the storm outside easing as if the world itself recognized the victory. Kale pulled Lyra into his arms, holding her close, both of them trembling from the effort and the intensity of the moment. "You were amazing," Kale whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Our child, our bond, it is stronger than anything I could have imagined." Lyra rested her head against his chest, feeling the warmth of his body and the steady pulse of their child. Tears of relief and joy ran down her cheeks. "We did it," she said softly. "Together, we did it." For a moment, the world outside the tower seemed still, as if holding its breath in awe. The palace itself felt lighter, freer, as if centuries of darkness had been lifted by their unity. But even in this victory, Kale knew the truth. While they had faced the curse and survived, destiny was never truly complete. The prophecy had been touched, not fulfilled entirely. Their child, radiant and powerful, held the potential to shape the future in ways that were still unknown. And somewhere, beyond the city and the horizon, forces that had lain dormant might yet awaken. Lyra noticed Kale's gaze turning outward, beyond the windows, toward the darkened streets of Eldrath. "What is it?" she asked. Kale's expression softened, but a trace of caution lingered. "The curse may be broken for now, but there are always remnants, shadows that linger in corners we cannot see. We have won this battle, Lyra, but the war, the challenges, may return, and when they do, we will face them as one." Lyra nodded, placing her hands on her belly, feeling the child stir. "Then we will be ready," she said. "All of us, together." Days passed, and the palace slowly returned to a calm rhythm. Nobles no longer dared to plot openly, and the citizens whispered of the king and his mate as forces of awe and inspiration. Lyra, once a hunted Omega, now stood as a powerful figure in her own right, protected, revered, and ready to embrace the power that had awakened within her. Kyle and Lyra spent time teaching each other, exploring the depth of their abilities, and strengthening the bond that had carried them through so much. Each night, they would stand together in the tower, hands intertwined, feeling the steady pulse of the child and the unbreakable force of their love. And yet, in the quiet hours, when the palace was still and the wind whispered through the corridors, Lyra could feel faint stirrings, a shadow that lingered just beyond perception, a subtle hint that not all threads of destiny had been revealed. Kale sensed it too, a gentle unease that reminded them both that the story was far from over. But for now, they allowed themselves to rest, to breathe, and to rejoice in the victory that they had earned together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of purple and gold, Kale and Lyra stood on the balcony, watching Eldrath glow beneath them. Lyra rested her hand on her belly, feeling the life within, and smiled. "Do you think the prophecy is finished?" Kale's eyes softened, and he pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "Perhaps for now. But destiny is a river, not a pond. It will continue to flow, shaping us, shaping the child, and we will face it together. Always." The wind carried their words across the palace grounds, rustling the banners in the trees, whispering of triumph, love, and the promise of a future built on courage and unity. The shadows that had once threatened to consume them now lingered in distant corners, harmless but watching, a quiet reminder that power and destiny were eternal. Lyra looked at Kale, her heart full. "Whatever comes, we face it together," she said softly. "Together," Kale agreed, pressing his lips to her hand. And as the night settled over Eldrath, a faint glow pulsed from her belly, a gentle reminder that the future, shaped by love, courage, and the bond of family, had only just begun. The city, ancient and watchful, seemed to breathe with them, carrying the story forward. And in the quiet, distant edges of the palace, a whisper lingered, soft and almost lost among the stones. "The child will decide the fate of kings, and the shadows will wait." Yet for now, Kael and Lyra embraced their victory, their hearts united, and their family protected. The curse had been faced, love had triumphed, and the future, bright and uncertain, stretched before them like a path of gold through shadowed lands. The storm had passed, but destiny still waited ready for the next chapter.